The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Maynard Bangs presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Bangs.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The Great Race versus Monte Carlo or Bust. The Great Race is a 1965 slapstick comedy adventure film that pits eccentric competitors against each other in a grueling automobile race from New York to Paris. Monte Carlo or Bust is a 1969 madcap comedy that follows a zany international car rally as contestants race from various European cities to Monte Carlo in a bid to win a valuable prize. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings in civil cases like this, the counsel appointed to represent each film will present their case for why their client is a superior movie, and ultimately the jury will render its verdict as to which is the better film. This decision will hereby stand in all rankings and listicles from now on until the end of time ad infinitum. Mr. Jeremy Black, you are representing The Great Race. You may begin your opening statement.
Yes, both of these are good films. I think they're both worth watching. They've got good casts, some members of the cast better than others, and I'd particularly like to praise Terry Thomas, Peter Cook, and Dudley Moore in the Monte Carlo or Bust, and I'd also like to say its theme song by Jimmy Durante is good, and Gerald Scarfe does wonderful graphics. Other than that, I'm not sure it's a brilliant film, or as good as The Great Race. The Great Race is a fantastic film made absolutely amazing by Lemon's work as Professor Fate, and I'm always one for villainous professors. So in order to
Why is that?
vote for villainous professors, I would vote for The Great Race.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Love it.
Appearing on behalf of Monte Carlo or Bust is Mr. Big Ben Haslar. Please present your opening statement.
I was just about to rest my case after my distinguished colleague on the other side gave his opening. But Your Honor, KC, Sunshine Band, I think today instead of two fine films, we might actually be comparing two okay films. But my client, Monte Carlo or Bust, or Those Daring Young Men and Their Jaunty Jalopies, depending on which country you viewed it in, is your most okay between the two. And here's why. It fulfills on its promises either way. Whether you want to see an all-out Fast and Furious race to Monte Carlo that would make Vin Diesel blush, or you want to see some people driving jaunty jalopies, near every frame of the film is crafted in executing that goal. Contrast this to The Great Race. Can you really say that that's true for that film? Yes, the basic framework is a race between the heroic Dr. Fate, who channels his own engineering know-how and gumption to test the mettle of his machine against the lazy but rich Leslie, who, like all influencers who came after him, just seeks to profit by advertising somebody else's brand. But this film takes significant detours on that promise. In its 2.5-hour runtime, roughly a third can't even be considered racing, but instead drawn out saloon fights, bar fights, pie fights, and lounging around some castle. Promises made, promises broken. And good luck sitting through this thing if you find Tony Curtis the least bit boring, because one of the other thirds is basically just him standing around saying, "Hey, look how handsome I am." No jokes or anything, I'm just handsome. This is where Daring Young Men shine, as it gives a wide cast to enjoy. You find the comedy styles aren't to your liking? That's no problem. Just wait a short minute and you'll be shown someone else who plays a different role with a different actor, with a different style, with different goals to achieve different methods to winning their race 100% to its advantage. It's a variable buffet of actors who are funny at the time. Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, thank you. And the jaunty jalopy, was there editing in that? Wasn't there a cut?
I saw jaunty jalopies. I can only comment on that one from here on out, unfortunately.
Understood. Mr. Black, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
Yes, Dorothy Provine as Lily Olay is, I think, one of the funniest and best performed songs. It's a burlesque, of course, but one of the funniest and best performed songs I've seen in film. And I think for that alone, the film is worth it and must be seen. I would urge every listener when they're finished with this program, or in fact, why bother listening to the rest?
Hey! Don't listen to that man, ladies and gentlemen.
You can hear her for free and watch it for free on on Google. It is absolutely fantastic. Now, there are obviously naff bits in The Great Race. There are naff bits in any sprawling masterpiece. The mid-60s went in for sprawling masterpieces of great length. They're what you would call in technical terms a picaresque tale, and as with any picaresque tale, some of it is better than others. That's exactly what you expect. But as far as Tony Curtis is concerned, he is the foil to Jack Lemmon. That's why he is, in a sense, relatively dull and boring. But in The Magnificent Men in in Monte Carlo or Bust, Tony Curtis has, in addition, the misfortune to seem jaded, tired, and past it. So
objection, though, that leads
to no. So that's enough for me at the moment.
Objection,
much
Mr. Haslar.
Better in this because there's nothing I can think of that was funny in The Great Race that he did at all. Whereas like watching him like try to help this damsel in distress while all these cars are like rolling by him and he knows that he's losing his race and he's just nervously sort of glancing out towards them. That is so funny. And you mentioned like the music is much better in Monte Carlo or Bust because it has this energetic sort of theme song that gets you in, and they use it as a theme throughout the film to keep the pace going. Whereas this long musical number with that bouncing dot that you're most likely tuning out to or checking your phone throughout, well, if you're watching it in modern times, is hard for me to imagine any audience willing to sit and put this race on hold again, to sit there and hold hands and sway as they say there's a tree in the forest.
There was very little to do in the 60s,
there it is.
Mr. Haslar.
There's lyrics. These lyrics make no sense. What tree blossoms whenever you kiss your...
holding hands in the cinema that he got conceived.
It's a magic love tree, Mr. Haslar. Order in the court.
I disregard 40% of my exhibit here because I am 38 and still lonely, but still, I can't imagine like, the lyrics of this making sense where it's like, hey, let's go to a tree and let's kiss my true love. And if the tree doesn't blossom, apparently it's not my true love. So what do you do at that point? Do you just like have someone lined up to kiss and wait for the tree to blossom? What happens if you do kiss and the tree does blossom? Does it unblossom when someone else steps in front of it? This song is garbage.
Mr. Black, what did you think of the intermission song? They also sing later.
Can I just say, there are weak bits in The Great Race. I mean, personally, I would have thought the crutch shots of the showgirls is rather these days would be regarded as rather inappropriate. But what one's looking at is a balance. It's a sprawling film of the mid-60s. I think as a shall we say, one primarily for the American market. It has a lot of Americana in it. I assume that works even better for the Americans than it does for the Brits. But if you're thinking of it against the background of a mad, mad world, I think it's actually got better cars and some better acting. Some bits.
The question from the bench.
Than others. I was less impressed with the section in Siberia and on the Bering Strait. I was more impressed with the section in America. I thought the send-up of the Prisoner of Zenda was very funny. Of course, it's likely to have been much funnier in 1965 when anybody there of any age watching a film would have seen the Prisoner of Zenda. Now, that's not true. And of course, this is always the problem if you're judging films in their age. It's full of in-jokes. Some of the pie fights are not particularly something that I greatly admire, but if you want to see a pie fight, you've certainly got a pie fight in The Great Race.
It won the 1965 Academy Award for Best Pie Fight. But question from the bench, though, before we leave the topic of music, Jeremy, Monte Carlo or Bust is a sequel, right, to The Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines?
Absolutely right.
Did that have a theme song similar to Jimmy Durante's?
Yes, we're Magnificent Men. I mean, I would, if I didn't want to actually cause amazing fuss, sing it to you. It did.
Please do.
No, it did have a theme song, and it also had many of the same actors playing fairly similar roles. It had Terry Thomasin, who I think is brilliant. I think he's one of the greatest actors of the last 20 years. They had Gert Frobe, though Gert Frobe is playing a different role. He's the the Prussian officer who's sent to. They had lascivious French. They had it was, yes. I personally, I mean, again, I'd be interested to hear what listeners have to say. I think if it was the Great Race up against the Magnificent Men in their flying machines, now I think the Magnificent Men is a tighter and better film than Monte Carlo or Bust. And I think I would go for the Magnificent Men of those two. But I deliberately suggested...
Yeah, who picked both these movies again?
Wait a minute.
Suggested The Great Race against Monte Carlo or Bust because it's not as good a film as the Magnificent Men.
That's okay. I can fight with one hand tied behind my back.
Suspicious. Please proceed.
Well, I'd like to rebut some of those points. Like that saloon song does go on forever. This fencing goes on forever, like 10 minutes, and there's nothing even remotely funny or suspenseful about it. They just do the same 3 or 4 clashes again and again. This is truly, as the poster says, the greatest comedy of all time. But that pie fight, it goes on and on and on, and it makes no sense as whatsoever. They pick up these pies. The pies are sitting in tins, and the tins seem to evaporate the second it leaves their fingers, and nothing but foam hits the people on the other end. And the one funny joke that they had, where Leslie walks through and he's not getting any pie on him whatsoever, they ruin at the end because we gotta have Natalie Wood just get that thing in the face like a wedding. No.
As far as it being too long, it's 2 hours, 20 minutes, so it's 160 minutes, which for a mid-1960s major film is not particularly exceptional. I mean, I agree with you, long films I don't like. I'm dreading going to see Oppenheimer, which clearly isn't designed.
Let's go see Barbie instead.
I have, and it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
We'll have you back.
So I agree. I don't like. I mean, the latest James Bond was too long.
The problem is it's easily fixable.
2 hours, 20 minutes works. Part of it, which is interesting, is the prequel in The Great Race, which in some respects, apart from the Lily Olay thing, is the best section in it. The prequel is very, very funny and goes on for a very long time. It's got nothing to do with the race and everything to do with depicting Professor Fate as a maladroit, malevolent figure whilst trying to compromise the great Leslie. And it's funny as device after device goes wrong. And that I like a lot. Now, I wouldn't want that taken out. As far as the pie fight and things, you've got to remember it's an age thing. When I was a kid, a pie fight must have seemed funny, but then I thought the Three Stooges was funny.
They were.
I bow down to the much graver knowledge and demeanour of my other colleagues here, particularly the worthy gentleman for the other side, who is too serious for these sort of affairs.
I like it. The problem is,
if you're like me and like sort of, a kind of it's The Great Race is great for a wet Saturday afternoon, which was actually the classic way in which people of my generation had to go often to the cinema. There was nothing else to do, and you wanted a long film. You didn't want to get out of the cinema and have to drift around the streets soon or go
I'd like
home.
to clarify, at least for the Great Race I saw was 2 hours and 40 minutes.
160 minutes?
I think
What's that?
Yeah, that's true.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. Sorry, my arithmetic's rubbish. Well done.
You can have all these scenes. You can have the pie fight and some of these things. I would cut the fencing entirely because that just wasn't funny whatsoever. But just have it, just trim it, and that's all you need. And then you have a.
No, I dare say that's probably true. It probably could do with trimming. I think all of these films could be made better by us, but we're not being given that chance.
Here.
As far as the fencing is a skit on The Prisoner of Zenda, when, of course, you had a famous, lengthy fencing thing with James Mason. It's a skit on all those Basil Rathbone films. Of course, Basil Rathbone was a great Olympic level fencer. And obviously, if you see it in that light, wonderful. It's again, when I was young, you know, you watched these Saturday afternoon films and you'd seen all the other Saturday afternoon films, and they, in a sense, without the need of modern textuality about intertextual comments, that's exactly what they were doing. And I thought they were often quite funny if you picked that up, just as Barbie is hilarious once it kicks off with making fun of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
All right.
Completely wasted on the generation of film critics like your good selves who will say, oh, that's just so corny, or they could have done that in a microsecond, and why couldn't they have done the whole thing in 5 minutes? There are different ages, and actually, you know, for your money, which is you would have got 2 hours, as I'm now gratefully informed, 2 hours 40 minutes. That was great entertainment for that period.
But I'd like to counter a little bit by saying, hey, Great Race, or sorry, not Great Race, Monte Carlo or Bust was of that same era, and it uses all of its time more to its effect. There's always some kind of new gag going on. It never belabors its point at all, except for maybe that one lodge scene, but that just inspires the greatest of Frasier episodes. So of this time, you know, it still doesn't stand because the Great Race knows how to use its time well by having all these different actors doing different things.
You mean Monte Carlo?
Sorry, Monte Carlo.
Yeah, I think with Monte Carlo, there are two doubles which I think are very funny. I mean, I think Terry Thomas and Eric Sykes, very, very good. They'd, of course, played a doubles before, and they were very good. Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, of course, had played doubles before. Again, extremely good. I mean, they, in a way, you could say, exhaust it. And if you want to be critical, you could say, well, once they'd done the nutty British officers, you know, they just went on with that single gag all the way through. Personally, I found Terry Thomas more inventive, though again, he always does play the same thing. But the rest were a bit of a shower. Who really cares? I mean, you know, French actresses not wearing very much, with Italians being lascivious about them. Well, that's about as original as saying a banana is usually yellow. I mean, there was
Italians.
There was nothing original in most of it.
With a large cast, though, you need to have like each person have a singular goal. So like one guy who's interested in the girls with the big, you know, like you kind of know what he's all about.
Yeah, you could say that.
What they're all about by different people's gags. I thought like every time those two British soldiers were on, they were the funniest team at all, where they like hit people and they're just like, oh no, he hit me. You know, like everything they did was just like perfect, pitch perfect British humor.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, you could say that. I mean, in its own way, you're right. They play static roles, formulaic, and some are funny and some aren't. And you're right. I mean, you could say that, I mean, personally, I think it's a bit corny, but then films of that period for that age are relatively corny. In theory, you've got a development in the relationship between Natalie Wood and Tony Curtis in The Great Race. I mean, personally, again, that's rather naff, but at least you've got a developing relationship there.
And well, on that relationship, like I know Leslie's the villain of this thing, but it spends an inordinate amount of time on him. He seems to be much against women's rights throughout and manages to trick Natalie Wood into marrying him by throwing the race at the end. Like he never says anything to the contrary to his original beliefs throughout the film. He just wants to have sex. And he knew that the Honorable Dr. Fate wouldn't be happy in accepting the accolades for his race that he didn't truly win. He's too ethical for that. So I find this film to be just a little bit of a letdown in that way, because he never has a true coming about.
This is all getting rather unfortunate in some of the language, and I hope listeners will now actually be cautious about. I couldn't comment on some of those phrases.
So, Mr. Haslar, in your opinion, Tony Curtis is insincere in The Great Race.
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. Like
it's not a romance.
Say, like, okay, I understand about women's suffrage. I get it. He never says that ever. He's just like, okay, well, if I stop the race and lose it, I get you. Cool.
He did say that he would concede to her so he would get her.
Yes.
Very exact words. Mr. Black, is there a romance here?
I think of a type. I mean, within the limits
of quick one.
Within the limits of what you're allowed in a film of that type in that period, yes. and I think slightly more plausibly because Curtis, by the later film, looks, raddled. And too tired, too old, as if he needed some blue pills.
I like to call it the Michael Keaton look, sir.
Sorry?
I like to call it the Michael Keaton look.
Well, actually, I think the whole point is that he was one of those actors for whom Viagra was what they thought that people meant when they referred today to sustainability. Sorry, again,
Jeremy's got a tight 8.
This is I have to explain to audiences that this has been recorded much later than we usually do, and I'm as an elderly gentleman let's leave out the gentleman, just as elderly time. I would say there is a romance of a type, and obviously it's corny, and the great Leslie is a corny character. But yeah, there is a romance and a type. I think there's also sort of the ambiguity of the film in the mid-60s with a character like Natalie Wood. So, for example, in that scene,
so would I,
where she decides to smoke a cigar and then finds herself coughing, they're, as it were, disparaging her. And these days, I think most of us would be uncomfortable about that. If a woman wants to smoke a cigar, she should be able to smoke a cigar. But it reflects the culture of the age. And as I've said, compared to the way in which they treat the female characters in Monte Carlo or Bust, particularly the voyeuristic approach to the French women, I really don't think one wants to put too much on that issue against the Great Race.
Well, would you say that, besides cigar smoking, is Natalie Wood, do you think her character is not painted as competent in The Great Race?
Yes, I think it is painted as competent. I think the whole point is that this is actually she comes across as impressive and as the real winner in many respects. Professor Fate, I think, is marvelous. I think his car is absolutely astonishing and brilliant. And I think he can act. Jack Lemmon is, I think, the best actor in that film. Number 2 is Natalie Wood, and number 3 is Tony Curtis. And I would
Hezekiah
a long way behind.
Hezekiah and Max are both better than Tony Curtis.
Yes, I agree with you.
Max number 2.
I agree with you entirely. They're not such major characters, and they don't have to play such varied roles. But yes, I would agree. They're both better actors.
Any final exhibits you'd like to present before I hand it off to Mr. Haslar?
Yes, the last final exhibit I'd like to present is I actually found the painterly quality of the film rather attractive. There were a lot of wide landscapes done well, particularly in the American West, and I found those actually attractive to watch. It presents, as it were, very nice wallpaper in front of which the characters act.
All right, thank you. Mr. Haslar, would you like to present your first exhibit?
Well, to rebut some of those points, as to the voyeuristic way that that Monte Carlo or Bust portrays some of its characters, it portrays all of them with a very even hand. Like, very rarely is somebody like that great of a person. Like, everybody, like, it's making fun of everyone's sort of ethnicity or their station and all of that. Like, everyone's meant to be sort of a farce of where they stand. And as to how, like, it portrays with these wide scopes, it had a very big budget. And what bugs me about The Great Race is, despite its big budget, so much action happens off screen. Like, they didn't want to crash anything. Like, all of it just like cuts away, and then all of a sudden we're seeing like the after effects of that. I don't see that sort of thing happening in Monte Carlo or Bust. It actually kind of uses pratfalls and effects to its advantage. It does all sorts of comedy in that way.
Mr. Black, would you say that the effects and the stunts are more practical in Monte Carlo or Bust?
I think both of them work well. I think that the stunts are concentrated in the prequel section of The Great Race. I think that there are also some interesting cars in Monte Carlo or Bust. I think Dudley Moore and Peter Cook are given a very interesting car. and I think it works well. Most of the other cars, they're fine to look at, but there's nothing particularly exciting about them.
You say that they're jaunty.
Sorry?
Would you say that they're jaunty?
Yeah. But no, I mean, I think they're both good picaresque films. You go from A to B and adventures happen en route. And I think they're both of essentially the same model. It is a pity that we're comparing, as it were, I mean, deliberately, a one that is derivative. Monte Carlo or Bust is a derivative film of The Great Race, down to deliberately running Tony Curtis again.
Thank you. I remind you, you picked both movies, Mr. Haslar.
I know.
If you'd like to present your next
deliberately.
Between the two, I will give like the lead, the heroic Dr. Fate. He's very funny in The Great Race. I will cede that to the prosecution. I think everybody else shines in this one, and from a wide cast. Nobody else. Natalie Wood doesn't do anything. The great Leslie doesn't do anything. Hezekiah maybe a little bit. These people, you can think of like almost any random character, and there's at least some scene that registers in your head as them being funny, which is a win. I'll promote you along with me, but in a junior capacity, of course. And he agrees, of course. People stopping traffic to make way for the beautiful women. That's a different form of comedy, but these were different comedic actors, so it uses that very well to its advantage. I think that on comedy to comedy, the Johnny Jalopies absolutely wins.
Black, do you think the comedy's stronger in one? Is Jack Lemmon funnier than like 6 and 7 other people?
No, I mean, as I've said, I think there are strengths and weaknesses. I agree with my colleague here. I think there are strengths and weaknesses. I'm not tremendously impressed with Curtis as the great Leslie, although he provides the foil, which is what he does. And you often need a straight man to play off the other one. But I'm just less convinced. I mean, I've heard my colleague, and he's speaking with conviction, but I'm just less convinced than he is that that all the gags in Monte Carlo or Bust are funny. I don't think that's the case. And
I think he's a little prejudiced.
I would reiterate that in my personal view, it's Thomas, Cook and Moore who are the really funny ones, with Thomas the funniest.
No love for Gert Frobe. Mr. Haslar, please proceed with your next.
The Gert Frobe one, it's very boring. It's, he wants to win the race, but he's not supposed to be recognized. Well, yes, once you've heard that once, and then it goes on becoming a running gag. It's not so funny as a running gag, nor is it so funny as a running gag with the Italians. To me, it just isn't that funny.
Fortunately, to wait a minute, and then you'll get someone else. I'm prepared to rest, Your Honor.
All right, both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Black, you may begin.
I think I would agree with a remark made earlier that neither of these are the greatest of films, and I would also reiterate my point that I think there's a lot to be said for both of them. I think they're both picaresque race films. The originality should go, or the quality mark should go, to the one that came first, which happens to be The Great Race. And as I've said, there are one or two absolutely classic moments. There's the long prequel, and there's the Lily Olay song. And if you like skits like pie fights and so on, I think it's full of scenes of that type. So on that grounds, and without in any way wishing to disparage the other film, I'd like to put it for The Great Race.
Thank you. Mr. Haslar, please present your closing argument.
Thank you. My dear Sunshine Band, I do want you to ask many questions while you're in that deliberation room. I don't think the argument that this one, having been earlier, has any merit, because so many of, I'm sure The Great Race has many inspirations. So many artwork that we have today is derivative of something that you can trace it down the line. So where it came in the timeline of things, it shouldn't be held against the jaunty jalopies. I want you to ask which film delivers on its promise more when you're being told if it has a great race or if there's going to be daring men and jaunty jalopies or Monte Carlo or bust. Which one does the most with its time? Which of the one is very cognizant of what the viewers are expecting of it, and which one just sort of belabors its own points and is self-indulgent? Which film has the most rewatchability between the two? The one that's shorter and uses its time, or the one that's longer and has like a fencing scene that just goes on? If you ask these questions to me, it's clearly, which do you trust? It's Monte Carlo or bust. Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Maynard Bangs, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, and Mr. Throw more brandy! Throw more brandy! Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine which film is the superior movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Right this way. You know, at least Max gets to push fancy buttons. All I ever do is escort people to the stupid deliberation room.
And
you are kind of our Max, aren't you?
Yeah. Man, that was a good impression, actually.
Yes, I haven't been walking around my house saying it over and over and over.
It was a very good read.
God, that line killed me. Oh, man. That's probably the loudest laugh the whole movie got out of me, though.
You know what? I got to agree. Let's just roll right into the deliberation, because when that happened, it cracked. I texted, and I went to text you immediately that had to be Ryan's nickname, and then I remember you texted me last night that had to be Ryan's nickname. So I was like, "Oh no, he's already all over it." So
bravo, Randy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what are you thinking?
So like as we often do with Jeremy, these are two pretty good films, and that they're very similar. I mean, one has Dudley Moore, big plus for it, but I keep finding myself thinking about The Great Race a bit more. Like, a lot of that stuff kind of stuck with me a bit. Like, when at the moment, I agree with Ben, like the big fencing scene, the pie scene, but kind of letting that stuff digest and settle. It's like, I think I really enjoy.
The pie scene should be trimmed, not cut. Because if you cut it, you don't get throw more brandy.
That's true. That's true. No, and like he said, the whole gag of like Tony Curtis not getting hit by the pipe at the very end. Like I was fine with him getting a little bit at the end. I thought that was good. But there are some really good jokes and lines in Monte Carlo or Bust. Like when the guy's saying he's like, yeah, but it's really cold out here. He's like, well, of course you've got the door open. It's just, like little things like that. Just those kind of tickle me. So, what are you thinking, Ryan?
I'm thinking that we have a case of a gentleman's 6 versus a gentleman's 5.
Ooh,
I don't think they're really not that different in terms of quality. I think that they both, I mean, I love when they used to make comedies in widescreen. I love when people utilize that. I mean, that's something that we do not do past the 60s. That is a bygone thing that I wish would come back, but probably never.
I agree entirely there. I agree.
And I love the aesthetic of both. I think that The Great Race is probably the better movie, but a good deal of that is just Jack Lemmon screaming at Peter Falk, and that gets very tiresome after a while.
Not to me, but yeah, to me, Lemmon is the biggest strength of Great Race, with Natalie Wood, and I would too, being a close second. Tony Curtis is a space filler in both movies. Yeah. To me,
the best thing about The Great Race is that without it, we wouldn't have pushed the button on MST3K.
Max, yep, I know.
That's where this all comes from.
Or probably Wacky Races.
It's definitely Wacky Races. Wacky Races is the other thing that inspired.
No, I want to speak up for Tony Curtis, because I really like Tony Curtis in The Great Race. So
really,
I liked him in both, but I actually really did like him as like the foil, because he's so subdued, but he has great physicality. It really lets Jack Lemmon go all the way to 11 in a believable way. So I really like Curtis for that role, and I really enjoyed his performance. So
you can really see his face.
I disagree almost with everyone.
Really see his face in like Penelope Pitstop's design, or maybe it is the Wacky Races girl I'm thinking of. The big chin butt. She's got the little chin butt. To me, the biggest thing, and the thing I was thinking about watching it though, because I watched The Great Race for the first time a few years ago. And actually, I was kind of underwhelmed. Like, I thought it was really long. And the thing I kept thinking is, like, when are they going to fucking race? Because they're not. They're standing around doing shit. And I thought that was the good point to Ben. If you're here for a race,
That's true.
Monte Carlo gives you way more of what I'm thinking of as a madcap rally race. Bunch of cars, bunch of crazy characters, zany, wacky races, live action wacky races. Monte Carlo is
like a
way more
Cannonball
satisfying.
Run in Europe.
Yeah, way more satisfying. But Great Race has that. I disagree with Mr. Haslar. I've been singing "There's a Tree in the Forest." I've been singing it all weekend. So I think it's a very catchy tune. Anyway, what I did want to say is I really like the Great Race a lot more the second time around.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure.
I gave it initially a gentleman's 4, but I bumped it up to a gentleman's 6.
Yeah, so if someone else watched it and was a little underwhelmed, watch it again, because I remember first time not liking Drunk Jack Lemmon, and the second time obviously loving Drunk Jack Lemmon, just because I'm like, okay, we're not racing now. If this is what we're gonna do, then it's kind of funny. Anyway, I guess I'll lock in first.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's pretty close. I think Monte Carlo is a lot stronger than Jeremy might be giving it credit for. It does make me want to see the prequel, the flying machine, Magnificent Men and their flying machines.
It's a little tiresome.
I'm sure it is, but what am I doing? But the Great Race, I kind of, for me, it's real dead down the even, and then you get the Natalie Wood character, who is a real person, a real character, feels realized, even if she's a little simplified. And you have nothing like that, really. There's not really a female character with much dimension in Monte Carlo. So I think I'm going to go with the Great Race.
All right. I watched both of these movies, and I wasn't in a great mood, unfortunately, but my spirits have been uplifted as today's been going on, and especially having Jeremy make some really bawdy funny jokes too. And that's what it's all about. It's about having fun, and I think the Great Race just brings a little bit more of what I'd be looking for in these kind of movies. So that I will go with the Great Race today, with apologies to Ben and his singing, but it's a close one for sure. So just by a hair.
Yeah, I can't make this I can't have it all people support the Great Race. I gotta give
Unanimous
some credit to Monte Carlo
right?
or bust. That's not fair to Ben. Ben put up a hell of a case. I mean, it doesn't really matter what I say anyway.
See 'em
we already
both.
know how it's going to turn out, but I'm going to give it to Monte Carlo or bust. So let's go tell
Ryan,
our
did you-
handsome judge.
But Ryan, did you know this is our second Gert Frobe movie with Jeremy?
Yes, with
Oh,
Goldfinger.
after Goldfinger.
And Gert Frobe, Gert Frobe used to be a pro wrestler.
Yeah.
Yeah, they called him Hurdy Gurdy.
I love that. That's the kind of trivia people come here for.
References in 2 episodes.
Yeah.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of Monte Carlo or bust versus the Great Race, we find in favor of the Great Race.
Oh.
The verdict is so rendered. I find in favor of the Great Race being the superior movie. Monte Carlo or bust is hereby ordered. 3 minutes in the cage with Hurdy Gurdy. That's right. Court is adjourned.
All right then. No. You see, old boy, my microphone wasn't plugged in. Jeremy Black, come over. It's your old Budley
Moore.
Yes, Budley Moore. Intellectually distinct. Can you believe it? And all of us Brits know each other. So why don't you come over here and tell me how you feel about today's verdict?
Well, I first of all, I really want to say I agree entirely with the judge who remarked that Natalie Wood is the only really developed female character in the 2 films.
He's a good-looking guy.
I think I should have said that. I think the judge who said that was perceptive and interesting. I'd like to thank our great film expert for making that point, which I hadn't thought of adequately, that we have lost the ability of widescreen comedies. and we've gone, which you also saw in Blazing Saddles, and we've gone for much more closed-in types, and I think that's been a loss and cuts against this idea that things are always better today. And the other last point I'd make is simply this. I agree entirely with that comment about a gentleman's 6 against a gentleman's 5. I think that's really fair. One of the things that I do think makes a difference for The Great Race is it is an American film in the sense that all the actors are American and it's largely set in America. It's an American film that is attractive to non-Americans, that works in a broader way. Whereas I can't help but feeling that Monte Carlo or Bust, despite including Tony Curtis, is very insular in its European in-jokes and settings. And therefore, I think it's less attractive for what one should be trying to do, which is create an international product. So I think that, they were similar films, but I think that I'd like to thank the judges on behalf of all of us listeners, because I think they've made the right choice.
All right, speaking of less attractive, here comes Big Ben Haslar.
No! That's mean.
I know. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Can we get more brandy?
Throw more brandy!
How we feel about the verdict today, old sport?
Well, I was court-assigned, so I won't lose any sleep over it, but I do think that the jury did not take into account the facts presented in the case. They talked about what they felt about it and not what was explicitly presented to them. So I'd like to say jury nullification. This was a bad verdict. Based on the evidence provided, I rebutted every point that was thrown at me and provided some of my own that weren't rebutted. So thank you.
Well, for everybody, listen to the Liliole song. It is so funny. And after that, you will just feel happier. And in fact, you'll have to be made by your family not to endlessly play it for a couple of days, which is what happened to me.
Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis. Oh, look, a piano.
There's my branding. Ah, wonderful.
Well, that had to be one of our biggest, baudiest episodes yet.
It was fun, and I heard some of those rebuttals. They didn't all convince me, but we're, for a discussion for another day. So Jeremy, what have you been up to? What have you been up to?
I've seen a number of films. The film I'll
go right into recommendations. What do you got?
Yeah, I'd like to recommend 2 films. One, since we've already mentioned it briefly, is Barbie, which I went to, and Sarah thought it was terrible, and I thought it was brilliant. I think it is extremely funny. I think it doesn't pull. I think you actually want to see how they're going to develop the story. I think it's wonderfully acted. Particularly, I think Ryan Gosling as somebody called Ken is very good. For somebody like myself, who I'm afraid is very dull and never had a Barbie doll and never dressed as Barbie or did anything interesting like that, I still found myself very interested as to what was going to happen to this character. So, and it actually works, it actually works if you're a man going to see it, just as a lot of the audience for James Bond films are women. So I liked Barbie. The other film...
It's not too late to dress as Barbie, Jeremy.
Well,
never.
I'll take it, I'm interested in that comment on your own life. I hope that brings you more social success in your milieu. Anyway, the other film I wanted to comment on is a 2019 film. The director is a woman called Celine Scianna, Scianna, and it's called Portrait of a Lady on Fire. The fire, she isn't literally on fire, other than in the sense her emotions. And it's a French film with English subtitles. I thought it was beautifully acted. And it is a classic French film. It's all about relationships, but I thought it was really good and well worth seeing, and I enjoyed seeing it. And I don't usually enjoy seeing films all about relationships at all. And
2 movies I recommended. Wow, that's weird.
Yeah, that is. I was wondering. I was like, you did recommend that other one, didn't you, Ryan? You guys are you and Ryan.
You guys are always dialed in together. I love it.
Right, did Ryan think it was good or not?
He recommended both of the movies you've recommended. He's recommended them before.
Oh, right. Oh,
Yeah.
well, no, Ryan is the great expert here on film matters.
That's right.
So, I mean, I feel very honoured that he's chosen them, and in my own clumsy fashion, I'm very happy to be in the same camp.
He's our very own professor. So Big Ben, what is your recommendation?
In my even more clumsy fashion, I actually preferred Oppenheimer. So when you do see that, Jeremy, consider the gauntlet thrown. Although I did like Barbie a lot, but that's a gentleman's 9 versus a gentleman's 8. But I'm going to recommend another film of this era, also about a great race, also starring the great Terry Thomas, and that's It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Although today I do find the lyrics and the opening song to be a bit cringy, as it focuses on how ethnic people from around the globe don't conform to our previously held stereotypes. The rest of the film is a blast, as it starts off with a dying man revealing the vague location to his buried fortune, and a large cast of everyone races to be the first one to claim it all. Like Jaunty Jalopy, it features everyone who was funny at the time, but is even more packed to the brim with these familiar faces, all with different styles, all doing their different shticks, and all doing it how they know how to do it best. The film was another staple in my household growing up, and I didn't even know some of these actors from the golden age of Hollywood at the time, but I couldn't help but being won over by them in this one film. So if you can, I recommend it even in its extended form, which clocks in at a whopping 163 minutes. But if that's too long for you, a more feature-length version can be more easily found on Prime, Tubi, Pluto, or Canopy. Support your local library.
And that dying man is Jimmy Durante, who sang the title song of Monte Carlo.
Yes.
It all comes together.
Ryan, do you know who does the theme song for Magnificent Men?
No, I do not.
Okay, so
I should have done my Jimmy Durante impression.
You should have. It's not too late.
Such a missed opportunity. Gotta redo the interview.
I'll do my recommendation as Jimmy Durante.
Please do.
All right.
So, but no, very cool. So my recommendation, the Jack Lemmon I grew up with, as most people of my generation no doubt did, was as a grumpy old man. And then as a grumpier old man. But in my recommendation today, he's just a grumpy old president. It's My Fellow Americans from 1996.
I almost recommended this. I'm not even kidding. Oh, great.
Two former commander-in-chiefs must put their political and personal rivalry aside in order to expose the corruption of the current administration. That sounds pretty serious, but it's actually kind of a madcap, strange bedfellows type of buddy road movie. I'd say it's picaresque. Jeremy, when the ex-presidents go on the lam. It's almost like a coming-of-age film if that age was over 65. Playing opposite of Mr. Lemon is Jim Rockford himself, Mr. James Garner, and the two managed to muster up some great chemistry with each other, considering that based on what I could quickly Google, it's their first film together. And of course, playing the corrupt current chief executive is Mr. Dan Aykroyd, a role that he seems to fit snugly, even if it's a bit derivative of his character in Tommy Boy. But anyway, the film serves as a terrific reminder that not all old people are vibrant, fun-loving sex maniacs. Many are bitter, resentful individuals who remember the good old days when entertainment was bland and inoffensive. My Fellow Americans is currently streaming nowhere, so go buy it, you animals.
You should. That movie is so funny. It still holds up. Great recommendation.
I like Jack Lemmon in Save the Tiger. I thought that was a very, am I right? Jack Lemmon?
Yes, you're right.
I thought that was a very, I mean, I haven't seen it for over 20 years, but I remember still thinking what a powerful film that was and how beautifully he played the role, which is not a comic role, how beautifully he played it. I mean, he was clearly a very great actor who was pushed in a particular direction because of the mobility of his features in some respects, but could also bring out a lot of great strengths and great roles.
And he gets to dress up in drag again in My Fellow Americans too, like from Some Like It Hot.
The mobility of his features. I love having Jeremy on the show.
Yeah, he dressed up as Dorothy from Wizard of Oz, I think.
Ryan, go man, go.
My recommendation this week concerns a rarity in cinema, the Japanese Western, an Eastern, if you will. From 1961, it's the masterful auteur Seijun Suzuki's Man with a Shotgun. It follows a mysterious drifter sporting a shotgun, hence the title, looking for the men who raped and murdered his wife, like the Eastern doing Western version of Bergman's The Virgin Spring, but better because there are fistfights in saloons and gun blasting mayhem, which I only support in fiction. Suzuki was one hell of a creative powerhouse, and I've been quickly making my way through his filmography like Tokyo Drifter, Branded to Kill, Youth of the Beast, Detective Bureau 2-3, Go to Hell, Bastard, greatest title ever, and Gate of Flesh. Suzuki made goddamn movies and did so just to have fun and do cool things, succeeding almost every time. Man with a Shotgun, along with the other titles I just mentioned, is streaming on the Criterion Channel as part of the Directed by Seijun Suzuki collection.
Oh, that would be a good spot for it, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, excellent.
All right, so...
Ryan, what is your Criterion collection up to now?
Oh, boy.
Huge.
Oof.
All right, you count it. You present it to us next time. I'd like to know. Then you can send pictures to Criterion.
Near 400. Around there.
Schlenzo D, send us on home.
All right, in a fit of last-minuteness, I Googled Charlie Bronson race car to see if I could find a movie that I could recommend for tonight. And Tubi did not disappoint. Cold Sweat from 1978. Okay, this movie looks like it had the same cinematographer as the guy who shot Manos Hands of Fate, but with somehow worse film stock.
So
as
none?
we watch Charlie Bronson. Watch this movie. It's amazing. Charlie Bronson zips around in a muscle car that is literally too blurry for me to discern what it is. But this film has something for everyone. Jill Ireland as a sexy hippie for Maynard. An ROJ favorite, James Mason, as an evil ex-army captain doing his damnedest at an American accent for the rest of us. Is this finally a bad Bronson movie? The answer is no. But this is not a brick. It's more like a loose tar shingle on the House of Bronson. So we still get lots of action. We still get lots of excitement. And Bronson is as ripped as he ever was and maybe ever would be. And that's what we're here for, right? Streaming on Tubi.
Excellent. No, great. Great. You got your Bronson in. I'm surprised he wasn't in some kind of like a Death Race 2000.
I was thinking he was
like
going to be in something like that. Yes,
yeah,
but that's what came up first. I literally didn't even scroll down. It just said Cold Sweat.
Bronson would also be great in one of these giant race ensemble movies. Like imagine Bronson have his own car, but like he's humorless.
He'd be the killing mechanic.
Everybody.
He's killing everybody. Yeah.
He would. He'd be killing everybody along the race. Yeah, he's like the stone cold assassin who's determined to win the race that way. Great idea. Make it.
Dude, if Fast and the Furious came out in the 60s, man.
Exactly.
We're going to call it Death Wish 2000.
Yes, please. AI
Fund
filmmakers, get out there and make
Terry
this.
Thomas is his nemesis.
Yes, and Dudley Moore as his wheelman or whatever. Not the wheelman, but what do you call that person who's navigator?
Shotgun.
I think
valet.
Anyway,
the valet, yeah.
All out of show, but we want to thank our guest Jeremy Black for joining us. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
A great pleasure, friends.
We're going to have you back probably next week. And we hope everyone else will join us next week again, as well as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Count it.
Ha-cha-cha-cha-cha.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.